Well, hello again, everybody. This is Mitchell Mote from the University of Tennessee and Tennessee State University Extension Program here in Rutherford County, bringing you episode number 3 of what we've come to call What's Wrong Now, looking at different problems that you might find in your landscape and garden today. And I will say, but as we get into this, that all of the problems that we're going to show in today's program are examples that I've observed personally in the last 2 weeks, or that individuals have brought to us at the Extension office in the last couple of weeks. So anyway, here we go. We're going to go out, first of all, today to the vegetable garden. And we walk out and we start looking down at the cucumbers, and we notice that the cucumber here, you see pictured on this slide, doesn't look so good. It looks like something's been chewing on it. There's holes in there, and there's these grayish brown areas all over the leaf. And we continue to look on around, and we notice there's a squash plant right next to it that it looks even worse than the cucumber did. So what in the world could be causing this? Well, the culprit in this case is this little critter right here. It's something called the spotted cucumber beetle. You know, spotted cucumber beetles, they don't always read the same books that we do, and maybe they don't realize they're named after the cucumber, so they don't know that they're should be feeding on cucumbers and not on squashes and so on. Because in all actuality, these guys, even though they're called a spotted cucumber beetle, will feed on most anything in the cucurbit family. That's squashes, pumpkins, cucumbers, and so on. They can be pretty damaging to those vegetable plants because of all the damage they cause to the leaf tissue. If they damage the leaf tissue on your plants to the point that they're not photosynthetically active anymore, then the plant's not going to make it. So this is a pest that you probably will want to do something about to control it. You know, there are different control options. A lot of different insecticides will have efficacy against the cucumber beetles. The pyrethroid insecticides, those that include bifenthrin and permethrin, as well as others, just for example. But we're going to stay in the vegetable garden now, and we look over at this squash plant and notice this brownish gray or grayish brown colored bug. Looks something like a stink bug on the leaf there. And we look a little bit more, and on the underside of the leaf, we notice what looks like some eggs. Well, you're exactly right. That's what they are. Those are eggs, and this the bug that we're seeing here, this pest, is the squash bug. The squash bug is common to squashes, zucchini, yellow squash, etc. It can get, again, like the cucumber beetle, it can get on cucurbits, not just squashes, but you really find them on the squash plants. They can be pretty darn damaging to those things. The adults, you know, they're that brownish gray color. The little ones can start off as when they hatch from these eggs as a pale gray looking color, and as they continue to grow and develop, they'll take on more characteristics of the adult. Now, there are different ways to control these. The insecticides, just like for the cucumber beetle, those pyrethroid insecticides such as bifenthrin and permethrin, as well as others, have pretty good efficacy against the squash bugs. Another thing that you might do is just smash those eggs with your finger, between your finger and your thumb, just so you can get a little personal satisfaction, because every one of those eggs you destroy will not hatch into a squash bug that can be a pest in your vegetable garden. And I will point out that the eggs in this slide are shown on the back side of the leaf, but you can certainly find them laid on the upper leaf surface as well. So you can scout through the squash plants. If you don't see the bugs themselves, but you see the eggs, you know the adults are there somewhere, because they had to lay the eggs and destroy those eggs when you find them. And you might consider using one of those insecticides to keep those adult populations in small populations, not let them grow enough to the point that they cause a lot of damage to your squashes and other plants. Staying now almost anywhere in the landscape, if you have Japanese beetles, they can be on a variety of different plants. Here we see a Japanese beetle feeding on a canna, on a yellow-colored canna bloom. That's looking right pretty out there, but except for the damage that this guy causes. Japanese beetles are pretty voracious feeders. They feed on a variety, probably 200 plus different species of plants. There are good control measures out there. Probably as good as anything is just to use one of the liquid 7 formulations, not the powdered 7, not the dust, but the liquid 7 formulation. They can be very effective at controlling Japanese beetles. Now, folks will sometimes say, you know, I sprayed my whatever it was, whether it was the okra plants or the Japanese maple tree or the cannas or whatever, the roses, I sprayed those, and then 2 days later, Japanese beetles were back. The stuff didn't work. Well, that's not to say that the insecticide did not work, but you got to remember these things fly. They have wings, and you're probably not the only house in the neighborhood that does have Japanese beetles, so they can certainly fly in from other locations, even though you control a population that might be present at the time you apply the insecticide. Others can fly in. Sometimes people ask about, what about using these traps, these pheromone Japanese beetle traps? Do the Japanese beetle traps work? Japanese beetle traps do attract beetles. They are a pheromone trap, so they do have an attractant in them that attracts the beetle to the trap. But if you think about that, you're attracting more Japanese beetles to your property than might have come there in the first place, but you are attracting them to the trap. But will all of them go into that trap? You know, I don't know. Seems like that the traps, you know, they're a really good idea, but you wonder sometimes if you're not working at cross odds with one another just a little bit by attracting more beetles to your property in order to trap them in the trap. What would be really good is if you could convince your neighbor to put Japanese beetle traps in their yard. And that way, that might be the best possible option. But Liquid 7 is a good control option for lots of different plants that are being bothered by Japanese beetles this time of the year. Staying in the landscape, look at this leaf that came from a hydrangea. It's not uncommon this time of the year to start to see hydrangeas showing these lesions, these dark colored spots with kind of a purple margin on the edge of the leaf, or excuse me, on the margin of the spot itself. This is an example of a foliar leaf spot disease. It's called Cercospora leaf spot. That's shows up a lot of times on hydrangeas, lots of other plants too, not just hydrangeas, but this time of the year, if you do have hydrangeas, be looking for that. You can protect uninfected foliage on hydrangeas as well as other plants from these leaf spot diseases by using fungicides that contain the active ingredients chlorothalonil or mancozeb. Those fungicides, though, will not do anything to make this leaf look any better. Infected leaves are going to stay infected, but the fungicide, what it does is help protect uninfected foliage and help to keep that disease from spreading and just taking over the entire plant. I guess the good thing is these diseases typically are not devastating to the plants. They're more of an aesthetic issue. They cause the leaves, the foliage to look sickly and spotty because they are sickly and spotty. But as far as long-term health detriment to the plant, they're not really that damaging. But if the plant is weakened enough over time, it can be weakened over time simply because the plant may not be as photosynthetically active due to the leaf spot damage there on the leaf tissue. But sanitation is also a good idea. If you've got just a few of these out there at one time, a few leaves showing that with the spots on them, just remove some of those, pick those off and dispose of them. Also, any that fall off. Don't leave them laying there all winter long in the flower bed or wherever it came from, but dispose of those properly as well. And interestingly enough, it seems that the hydrangeas that are in the full sun locations tend to be bothered by this particular leaf spot disease than some that might be in more of a shady place. And sometimes that seems a little bit counterintuitive. We might expect to see more fungal pathogens in areas that don't get as much sun and don't dry out as fast. But in this case, those hydrangeas out in the full sun seem to be bothered a little more so by the Cercospora leaf spot. Next, we'll go back to the vegetable garden and look at tomatoes. This particular tomato, it's a container-grown tomato plant, and an individual brought us a picture of that. And the concern was this odd-shaped growth out here on the new growth on the ends of the branches. The red arrow is pointing to it right there. I don't know how clear you can see that in this photograph, but the leaves are very narrow. They take on a kind of a strapped look, and they're twisted and curled a little bit. Here's a close-up shot of some of the foliage, the stems and the foliage that was taken off of a similar tomato plant that was showing that kind of a symptom. Well, what is this we're seeing here? These symptoms, this kind of growth that you're seeing exhibited by this tomato plant is very typical, a typical symptom of what you see from herbicide damage on vegetable plants, or just not just vegetable plants, but lots of other plants too. Those plants that are sensitive to various herbicides will show this unusual growth, distorted, misshapen growth. How does it get there? How do the tomatoes and other plants pick up this herbicide damage? How are they exposed to it? It can be a variety of reasons. You know, one is just through drift. An herbicide application was made, say for example, to a lawn area, and the wind was blowing a little bit, and the wind blew some of the spray mixture over onto the plants themselves. That is always a possibility. I have seen almost every year now for the last several years instances where individuals had used livestock manure, whether it was sheep manure, cow manure, horse manure. They picked up at their neighbor's farm or their friend's farm, and even the farmer themselves sometimes have done this. They have taken that manure and put it around the vegetable plants because, you know, it's got good organic matter there and got a little nutrient value in that manure. But also, if the animal grazed on pasture or consumed hay that had been treated with an herbicide called Graze On Next, that's a really good weed control herbicide for, or weed control product for pastures and for hay fields. Very safe for animals because it passes right through their body. It passes through it in the urine and also in their feces. But it stays in that manure residue for a long time. And because it does stay in there a long time, if you use animal manure from animals that have consumed forages, hay or pasture that has been treated with the Graze On Next HL herbicide, there will be enough of that herbicide present to cause this kind of damage to your vegetable plants. So you need to be very careful if you're going to use animal manures around vegetable plants or other sensitive broadleaf plants, whether they're flowers or whatever, to ensure that they have not been treated, or that the animals that the manure came from have not consumed forages that have been treated with that particular herbicide. I guess the safest bet is don't use manure if you're not sure where it came from yourself. But anyway, that's a very common thing that we see this time of the year, and actually this just came to the extension office last week. Also, it's out in the landscape. You look here, we see these webs out on the end of some branches. That's a box elder, small box elder tree right there, in amongst some privet in an old fence row. And you notice these webs out here on the end of the branches. What are those things? You give it a little closer look at them, and it's full of these little worms. Well, you know what? These are the fall web worms. And here it is, just now the first full week of summer, but we've already got fall web worms appearing. I guess the web worms sometimes don't read the almanac and know that they're not supposed to be here till fall, but typically they do show up in the summertime and can be active from now on up until September, maybe the early part of October. They're not really large worms. They're kind of they're small, maybe an inch or so maximum length, and these do have a dark head, so these are the black-headed fall web worms. They don't cause an awful lot of damage to the plants. They're really more of an aesthetic issue than they are a real detriment to overall plant health. You know, if you don't like the way it looks, okay, then go prune them out. A lot of these will be built, or they'll build their webs, their nests down low in the tree. Reach up with a set of pruners and just clip those out, or just leave them alone. Let the birds eat them. You know, they don't cause enough damage to really hurt the tree. They're not pretty to look at, but in the overall scheme of things to worry about for trees, I'd put this one way down on the list. Now, there are insecticides that will control them if you're just dead set on controlling those things. But again, that's one of those things that I wouldn't be all that much concerned about, to find a few webworms in trees around my landscape. And finally, we'll go to this picture that came to us this week from one of the residents here in the county. And they were not concerned, I guess, but maybe a little puzzled about this odd-looking material that was growing in their driveway. And so here's a picture of it. It's kind of a green, globby-looking mass of stuff. And here's a closer shot, and you can see, yeah, it's green. It looks gel-like in appearance. It's just a really odd-looking growth. What is this? Well, this is something that's called nostoc, STOC, and it's not a fungus. It's not an algae. It's actually, it's a bacteria. It's a cyanobacteria, and it creates its own energy through photosynthesis. Does it cause damage to anything? Folks will sometimes find it growing out in a lawn area where there's no grass, and I think this stuff killed the grass. No, that's probably not what happened. It grows in places where they're on soil, where the soil is really compacted, where water doesn't move into it very well, where it doesn't drain out very well at all. And it'll also grow on the impervious surfaces, like you see growing on this this limestone gravel driveway. It'll grow on concrete sidewalks and patios and things like that. As far as it being, a detriment to the grass, no, it doesn't kill the grass at all. It just grows in places where grass will not grow, and it will also grow up on those surfaces, walking surfaces or driving surfaces, like I mentioned, and when it's wet and gel-like this, it can be slick. So it could be, a safety hazard, I suppose, if some of this were growing on a sidewalk and someone were to step in it and slip and fall. So how can you avoid, or how can you deal with this? How can you manage an issue like this? Well, for small bunches of it or patches of it that might be growing out here, take a scoop or a shovel and scoop it up and get rid of it. That's one way to do it. But if you've got lots of it out there, and if it's growing on a sidewalk or something, there are moss algae controlled products that contain potassium, salts, and fatty acids that will do a pretty good job of controlling that. You can use those in lawns and so on. Again, they're aimed at controlling moss and algae, but they also have activity against this nostoc. There's another particular compound, perlagonic acid, that can be used to control the nostoc that's growing on walks and driveways. But you would not want to use it out here on a lawn area or grass area where other plants are growing, because it does act like an herbicide and can have detrimental effects to desirable plants. Again, it's called pelargonic acid. A brand name is one called Scythe. That's a product of Dow AgroSciences. But it doesn't, this stuff looks odd. It's unusual looking. And when it's wet, it'll have this jelly-like mass-looking appearance to it. But when it dries up, it'll form a thin, dark-colored crust on the surface of the ground or the surface of the sidewalk or whatever it's on, and it'll stay that way until it rains again. Then it'll boom, it pops back out, and it's got that thick gel-like mass of stuff. Again, it's called nostoc. Not really a problem, but it's just an unusual-looking thing. Well, again, that's all I've got for you today on this episode of What's Wrong Now. If you have a question about anything that we talked about today, here's contact information. You can give us a call here at the office at 615-898-7710 and leave a message. We'll be glad to get back to you. Or you can email me here at mmote1@utk.edu. Well, that's all I've got for you today, folks. I hope you found this information useful, and I hope you'll tune again. Until next time, this is Mitchell Mote from the University of Tennessee and the Tennessee State University Extension Program saying so long.